evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, the Campus Craziness Edition. As a country, we invest a tremendous amount of money and power in our higher education system. We count on our universities to train future leaders who will, we hope, preserve the freedoms that built and sustained our country over hundreds of years. But is that happening? How well are those freedoms being preserved on campuses? That's the subject of tonight's show, a special hour-long edition of Campus Craziness. Now, no campus represents the shift more vividly than UC Berkeley. In the 60s, Berkeley was the heart of the free speech movement. Now, things are very different. Troy Warden is a student at Berkeley and also works as a correspondent for Campus Reform. We talked to him recently about the current intellectual climate at his school. So you went and spoke directly to the so-called anti-fascists. What did they say when you talked to them?
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me on. And I just want to let my story be known. I went to this meeting because I wanted to have these anti-fascists own up to the violence they've perpetrated and permitted against our club. And I, quite frankly, called them out. I asked them to simply condemn the violence that's been perpetrated against the Berkeley College Republicans. And their response was, quite frankly, very disappointing. They failed to even acknowledge that it occurred. The person, the leader of Refuse Fascism, Sunsara Taylor, said that she didn't even know of the occurrences. And this is completely unacceptable because I've gone on the media multiple times. She's been on this program before. And I've written about this on campusreform.org multiple times. We've had members punched in the face. We've had members spat at, pepper sprayed. I was almost beaten up during the February 1st Milo Yiannopoulos riots. And she refused to acknowledge them and actually said not all violence is equal. She suggested to her supporters that in some cases violence is completely acceptable if someone disagrees with you. And
she said the same thing on this show pretty clearly. Do you get any sense that they're calling themselves anti-fascists ironically? Here you have people dressed in costume committing violence against people whose politics they disagree with, and they're anti-fascists. I mean, are they serious when they say that?
Well, partly, but also partly not. You know, these groups are receiving funding from persons such as George Soros. Yeah. This, quite frankly, is exactly the kind of line that they are going to pull because it's going to get them a lot of funding from very liberal donors. So if they take a very strong stance against Mr. Trump and his supporters and they label them fascists and they go out onto the streets and commit political terrorism, physically intimidate and verbally intimidate conservative students on campuses and other Trump supporters in the streets, then I think it's the best way for them to receive the amount of funding they want.
It's grotesque that anyone would be funding political violence, but people are, as we've noted often on this show. Now, what is Berkeley as an institution doing to protect you? They're all about safe spaces. Your space does not seem very safe to me.
Well, that's the ironic thing. The Berkeley College Republicans have never and will never ask for a safe space. But many other groups have. Black Lives Matter, for instance, blocked white students specifically from going to class in protest. They had a whole list of demands, including safe spaces. But the Berkeley College Republicans have simply asked the city of Berkeley, the administrators of the University of California, Berkeley, and the UC Police Department to simply protect our rights, to give us the proper amount of personnel and security, and instead of doing that, they slap very large security fees on us, usually over $5,000 for a conservative speaker. And then when rioters do show up, when violence is perpetrated, when threats of violence are made, they either have their security and police and peace officers stand down, or in fact, they cancel our event even before we're able to put them on. So in all these cases, what you've seen is high-profile and even low-profile conservative speakers prevented from speaking on campus because the university is too cowardly to defend their mantle, the mantle they proudly proclaim every chance they get, which is the birthplace of the free speech movement. And like I wrote on the night of February 1st, I said the free speech movement is dead. The very birthplace of the free speech movement is also its grave.
Wow. I don't have anything to add to that, other than how old are you?
I am 21. I just turned 21.
Man, I was nowhere near as articulate or as brave as you are when I was 21. I'm impressed. Trey, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, UC Berkeley may be the most visibly nutty campus, but the mania has spread just about everywhere in the country. We've had a lot of students on this show from all over who have pretty remarkable ideas about how they ought to conduct themselves on campus. From vandals to socialists to segregationists, here are some of our favorite student guests from the past few months. You need to be allowed to say what you think, and what you think doesn't have to be popular or constructive or polite for you to be allowed to say. You have an absolute right to express your views, period.
You're right.
Do they not teach?
Right.
Okay, then, and that would include whiteboards, no? I mean, it's kind of simple.
The idea of freedom of speech is essential to our country. That's literally what our country was founded on.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you can disagree with somebody and have that conversation,
stand up for it? You're
that's
a
really good.
student.
But I will say, there's
I'm standing up to the
Tucker,
First
let me
Amendment.
finish here. There's a difference between you expressing a view and then you providing intimidation and harassment to another student.
So it seems to me if you're going to ban whiteboards, why stop there? Why not ban pens and keyboards and other instruments of divergent opinion and just kind of suppress speech and everyone would be happy? You're a pretty articulate person with a precise command of the language, and presumably in an article this long you could explain exactly what that action, what form it would take. And in this case you said it takes flipping cars over. And my point is, someone paid for those cars. Like, those aren't your cars. And to destroy other people's property to make your political point isn't really a valid path, is it?
Well, first of all, they flipped cars when the Cubs won. But secondly, Tucker, I mean, so I think that, yeah, it's an article, and I exaggerated. But, I mean, I'm trying to explain now what I think I actually mean by political action that doesn't consist in sort of sanitized or moderated Q&A sessions or bipartisan roundtables at the Institute of Politics.
Can you name a single example where a speaker has been physically prevented from speaking by conservative students?
I know basically that Barack Obama and Alice Walker have been sort of denied, or at least attempted.
No, they were not stopped from speaking. Nobody put their bodyguards in the hospital. Nobody threw rocks against the building or pounded on the windows. Conservative students have not, that I'm aware of, and I would denounce it immediately if they did, stopped any speaker. And yet you see it on the left, and yet your piece doesn't say one word about that. I wonder why. I would defend the right of anybody to say something I disagree with, and you ought to too, and especially as a college student, and I think you're still a college student.
I'm a graduate student, and I actually
You're
teach.
a graduate student, you teach, then you're in a world that was created specifically to protect people who have non-mainstream opinions.
But that space does not protect everybody. Let's be clear about that.
Apparently it doesn't. It doesn't protect people you disagree with.
Does it protect people who advocate killing cops? Do you think that will go well? If someone wanted to go and speak on a college campus,
First of all,
a tour that said that talked
the time.
Really? I really want to know. I really want to know where there's anybody.
Have you been to a Black Lives Matter protest?
Absolutely not. I support Black Lives Matter. I would never support Black Lives Matter if they advocated killing a police officer.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Right? So if I were to go to a rally and people said, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon, about police officers advocating the killing of cops, I mean, you would say that's unacceptable. That should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if student group wants to have a discussion about police brutality or racism.
If they were to use that phrase, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
I'm not interested in a phrase. I'm not going to debate you over this phrase should be allowed or not.
Because you have no principles. That's why. Because all the things you've been saying for the last 11 minutes are totally untrue.
And I came here because I thought I would get the same respect from you.
You just revealed who you are. You're basically saying the flag represents evil to the extent that it shouldn't be flown. And my question is, why is it always rich kids who make that point? Why is it always kids from a $62,000 a year college like Hampshire who are making that point? None of the workers who you claim to be representing ever say that. You never see anybody at a trade school burning the American flag. Have you noticed that? I'm not making this up in my mind, am I?
I think that you're more likely to pick up a story in which rich kids do burn a flag on the basis that we have more access to the media. I mean, like, the flag burning wasn't
really? So you think it's like your average HVAC repair school, they're burning the flag?
Well, I believe,
there is something
as you and me both know, the politics of this country are divided by class.
What if a bunch of, like, straight white kids got together and said, you know, we feel oppressed here by people perhaps like you, Sean, and we need our own student-sponsored, school-paid-for room to gather with just straight white guys. Would you say, I get that, that's okay? Or would
Look,
you not?
I think that given the data that we have around suicide and the pressing needs of our community and the limited space that we have, there are other ways in which that space can be used.
Oh, so no, in other words. So it's a double standard. So certain races get their own rooms and others don't, is
No,
what you're saying.
what I'm saying is that we're reacting to needs and we're providing support for communities that have demonstrated those needs
But
through data.
what you're doing is using imprecise, silly academic talk to dodge my question. So
No,
let me just ask you,
not at all.
Let me ask you one more time.
I can't think of anything more real than suicide, Tucker.
Well, I'm not denying the reality of suicide.
No, you said I was using academic talk. I'm not doing that at all.
No, I'm contesting your assumption about what causes suicide.
No,
and
you don't think that isolationism causes suicide?
I don't know what isolationism is. It's actually a foreign policy term here in Washington.
So,
I guess it means not being around people who
when I say isolation, yeah, I mean cutting yourself off, not feeling like you have a community. And there are differences among these communities.
Let's get deeper here. So you're saying that people are more comfortable, maybe have better mental health when they're around people who are just like them. And I'm saying
I feel like
maybe that's true, but it's kind of a radical thing to say because that, of course, again, was what the people who supported segregation said. There is massive unemployment in the middle of the country, massive, and a higher rate for men than during the Great Depression. If you bring in more workers, will there be more or less employment? There will be less employment, more people competing for fewer jobs. This is basic economics. How can you as a socialist be for that?
What we need is jobs programs, and the reality is that appointing a CEO. The reality is that appointing a CEO of Goldman Sachs as our finance advisor, somebody who rejects the concept of the minimum wage.
Look, I'm taking you seriously, and you're just repeating dumb liberal talking points. Be a socialist. Be a radical. Open your mind. I'm serious. You're not a socialist. You're a lifestyle liberal who's upset about the same boring rich people topics. Look at the economics of it. Well, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos tried to honor students at a Florida university. She got a mountain of boos for her trouble. Up next, we'll talk to a professor who says she should have been attacked because she is a tool of white power. And DeVos' experience was hardly unique. Notre Dame students even walked out on the vice president. Comedian Michael Loftus will be here to weigh in on why graduation has become a political event. It's become an annual tradition, one of the worst ones. Every spring, schools hold graduation. Plenty of Democrats, but almost no Republicans are invited to speak, and the Republicans who do show up are booed. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos learned that recently when she was booed at Bethune-Cookman University's commencement. Jason Nichols is professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland at College Park. He's denounced Secretary DeVos as a representative of white power in the United States. We spoke with Professor Nichols recently. Here's the conversation. Professor Nichols, thanks for joining us tonight. Why were you upset that Betsy DeVos spoke before these students?
So I wasn't upset at all, Tucker, that she spoke before these students. I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. I think she has a right to speak. My problem was that the community made a decision that she should not come, including 60,000 people from the BCU network said that they didn't want her there. And I think commencement is a special event, particularly for students and families, and if they decide that they don't want her there, it shouldn't be a unilateral decision made by the president of the university.
Well, 60,000 people don't go to the school, so I don't know exactly who those people were. That's far more than actually attend the university. So, I don't know where you're getting that number or why you believe that online survey speaks for the community, whatever the community is. Did you poll every student there?
So no, I did not poll every student. I looked at, well, I think in terms of the student body, we saw how they reacted. They used their First Amendment right, which was to protest. I think, when we get to 60,000, I talked about the community. That's not only students, that's alumni, that's faculty past and present, that's staff past and present. That's everybody who really cares about BCU and feels invested in what goes on there, particularly in commencement.
Well, of course, you don't know that any of that's true because it's an online survey, so it could be anybody. So let's not pretend that we know exactly who these people are. Look, you may not like Betsy DeVos or think she shouldn't have spoken, or maybe the kids don't like her. I'll take your word for it. Here's what drew my attention to you. You wrote in a piece for The Hill that having her there ignores the desires of black people, you said, especially students. They don't matter in the face of green dollars and white power. What does Betsy DeVos have to do with white power?
So she is a member of the Trump administration, which has shown racial animus towards people of color all over. And also, when we talk about white power, I just want to be clear that white power is not really shaved heads and combat boots the way we think of white power. White power are social and political norms that generate disparities in health outcomes, in education, in employment, and wealth, and criminal justice. So when we talk about white power, we're talking about a system and something that is systemic. And when we're talking about Betsy DeVos
you're not saying anything. I mean, you're just another tenured demagogue who doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. I mean, look, Betsy DeVos is a living human being. Do you have evidence that she supports white power, whatever that is? Let's not tar her by association.
Absolutely. Well, first,
does every black employee of the administration support white power? Like, what are you talking about? I'm sick of this. I mean, let's be real.
Allow me to say what it is that I'm talking about.
Good.
Now, in terms of Betsy DeVos and her connection and why these students would be upset. Number one, she wants to cut $4 billion from Pell Grants. Now, 900 students at BCU actually receive Pell Grants, and we know African-American students at large are more likely to receive them because they're more likely to be poor, actually 3 times as likely as white students. She also wants to end student loan forgiveness for people who are in service. These are all things that are going to affect African-American students. But if we're talking about the Trump administration
but they'll also affect
students
of every color. Wait, hold on. They'll also affect students of every color.
I mean, they're not. Wait, hold on.
Slow down.
Now,
we're talking about disproportion. We're talking. Hold on. Slow down. We're talking about policies.
Okay, we don't have to talk about
policies that are federal law and therefore affect everyone, regardless of what he looks like. So they're not inherently racial. Okay. First,
no, but
second,
that's where you're wrong.
Well, no, they're not. I mean, there's nothing about race in Pell Grants, and there's nothing about race in debt forgiveness. And so if you're using that line of logic, you're saying that if I'm opposed to you on policy issues, I'm a racist, or I support white power, and you shut the conversation down.
That's not what I'm saying, Tucker.
What are you saying?
Tucker, you're obfuscating what it is that I'm saying.
Well, what are you saying?
What I'm saying, I've already said what white power is, and I believe that we're talking about things that disproportionately affect people of color. And, you know, if you want to talk about the Trump administration at large...
But hold on, why does that mean that she should stop? Look, I'm trying to be patient. If you want to have a debate about Pell Grants, it's totally legitimate. I mean, we may even agree on Pell Grants. I don't even know, or school choice. Sure. It's when you start calling people bigots that you end the conversation. And as a professor, I think you would like to illuminate it, elucidate, rather than cast aspersions and shut down, which is what you're doing.
Okay, Tucker, I'm wondering where it is that I called Betsy DeVos individually a bigot. Please tell me where that is.
You said
I don't remember saying that she was a bigot.
Because of white power. And my point is, look, you may not like the Trump people, you may disagree with her view on Pell Grants, but that has nothing to do with,
I never called her a bigot.
That's exactly what you're. Let's not be coy here. You wouldn't use that phrase. I would never use that phrase unless I was calling someone a bigot, because that's what it is.
No, I don't think that that's what it is. I think it's saying that the school, and as a matter of fact, it wasn't even a critique on Ms. DeVos herself. As I said earlier, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment to the Constitution. I think she had every right to speak. I think she could have done what Dr. Carlson did when he was...
Nobody's contesting her right to speak. You're not contesting her right to speak, and I'm not either.
Absolutely
You're just saying she shouldn't have done it.
We agree.
Because she's on the wrong side of Pell Grants, and white supremacy or white power got her there. And I'm just saying, look, you totally eliminate the possibility of reasonable conversation when you say nonsense like this that you can't even define, you clearly don't understand, and you're just telling other people to shut up.
I don't understand. I think I clearly defined it for you. I'm not sure if you were listening, Tucker.
Intensely.
But I think I defined it for you.
Okay. Well, I don't understand, so I hope you will come back and fill me in. I appreciate your coming on tonight, Professor. Thank you. Sociologist Charles Murray recently tried to give a speech at Middlebury College. You may remember what happened next. Joining us after the break, former Education Secretary Bill Bennett will describe what these meltdowns say about modern campus life.
President Trump marking Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery. Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright with a Fox News update from America's News headquarters. The president speaking at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring Americans who died in battle. The president placing a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He also spoke of the fallen Americans, saying, quote, "Words cannot measure the depth of their devotion, the purity of their love, or the totality of their courage." Elsewhere in the news, newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron and Russian President Vladimir Putin holding talks at Versailles. The two leaders say they discussed the situation in Syria and ways to pursue closer cooperation of anti-terror efforts. Putin also rejecting allegations Moscow meddled in France's presidential election, but defended his March meeting with Macron's opponent. I'm Kelly Wright. Back to Tucker.
Sociologist Charles Murray's book, Coming Apart, may be the single most important book in print for understanding the decline of the American middle class and the rise of Donald Trump. In other words, college students could learn something from reading it and listening to him. But instead, when Murray tried to speak at Middlebury College in Vermont in March, students got so violent that a professor escorting Murray had to be hospitalized. Another professor was so intimidated by the mob, he apologized for inviting Murray at all. We recently spoke to the Secretary of Education in Ronald Reagan's administration, Bill Bennett, about what happened. This does seem, it's one of a million examples, but it seems particularly illustrative because Middlebury, A, is a serious school. It's a famous school.
Yes.
It's a well-regarded school. It's very hard to get into. It's very expensive. And here you have a professor who's learned exactly the wrong lesson from what happened with the Murray speech. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. That's what goes on in places like Middlebury, and we've seen it at other campuses. The odd thing to me is I know Charles Murray very well. I know you know him. There isn't a more civilized human being. If you read his book, Coming Apart, the professors up there at Middlebury read it, said it's a middle-of-the-road approach to things. But because Murray wrote the bell curve about cognitive stratification, they would not let him speak. This is an outrage. Let me get right to the point. Can this stop? Yes, if the people in charge, and the students are not in charge. I know it's a cliche now to say the inmates are running the asylum. The doctors are running the asylum. The doctors are the administrators and the faculty. And they're quacks. And they need to stand up and say what the college or university is for. My only argument with Charles is that he shouldn't have stood there so long. I don't think he should have stood there for an hour and taken it. And where was the administrator who would step up and say, stop this? You will be arrested if you keep this up. You will be expelled. This does happen, Tucker, occasionally at other campuses. Ohio State, they handled it very well. At Middlebury, they couldn't. But you got to wonder, what am I paying $55,000 a year for?
Well, exactly. And not just the parents paying the tuitions, which I think probably a minority at a lot of these schools, but the taxpayers subsidizing all of this. So where's the incentive to change if institutions like Middlebury remain the richest institutions in American life?
There's not much incentive to change from the perspective of the parents. Because as we found out when I was Secretary of Education, they will pay almost anything to get a prestige degree or what's told to them to be a prestige degree. The only people who I think who can do it in the short run are the Board of Trustees, if they have any sense of responsibility, and the faculty. However, this bubble may burst. My friend David Galerner at Yale thinks it's going to burst because of the absurdity of it all. Plus, technology is coming in on the university. People are taking more and more courses online. People are starting to get educations online. Brilliant man Peter Thiel, we were talking about earlier, has enlisted students out of high school, not to come to a university, but to come to a setting in California where they work with each other and don't go to college, just develop their own ideas. Alternatives are spreading out, are breaking out all over the place. But in the short run, couldn't we do this, Tucker? Which is if you have someone on campus with whom you disagree, or a number of students disagree, have someone with an opposing point of view give a counter presentation or have a debate. This is what happened to me. When I went to Stanford to defend Western civilization, they said, anybody around who can defend Western civ? Anybody interested? Put my hand up. Sure, I'll do it. Anybody else? I'll do it. I went out. They said, but you must respond to critics. You must respond to the faculty. I went out. Did an hour and a half with the faculty after my speech. That's the way to do it. Don't shout them down. Hear the argument. If it's absurd, show it to be absurd by your own argument.
Well, that's the premise of the show. Legitimate debate is the key way that people's minds are changed, I think.
You would think, especially on a campus, on a university, the free marketplace of ideas, you know? This is what it's supposed to be. And I always think, there's a great line from Eva Brand. She was one of the tutors at St. John's College.
Yes.
She said, these little republics are dependent upon this larger republic and its principles. And those principles are, as we know, free exchange of ideas.
So really quickly, in the meantime, before this happens, should conservative parents opt out of this whole cycle of seeking prestige degrees for their kids?
It would be a good idea, but it's very hard to tell parents to do that, particularly when in neighborhoods that you and I know about, they enroll kids. I overheard this conversation in preschool at 4 years old saying, it's a feeder to Harvard. It's a what? It's a feeder to Harvard at 4. So people seek prestige, and as the sociologists will tell you, this is one of the things most sought after after people satisfy their basic material needs, status.
I think people would live outside if they had enough prestige.
But imagine what you could. That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
Dr. Bill Bennett, thanks a lot for joining us. It was great.
Tucker. Thank you very much.
Up next, we'll replay our epic showdown with Yvette Falarca, the professional Berkeley protester who believes political disputes ought to be resolved with violence. Plus, Elizabeth Warren couldn't help herself from bashing her political opponents during a recent commencement address. Why is that exactly? We'll talk to comedian Michael Loftus about why you can't escape politics on graduation day. Some people aren't content just to shout down campus speakers they disagree with. Others prefer to get right to the point and use beatings to resolve their political disagreements. Yvette Falarca, for example, was caught on tape doing just that.
Come here now. Off our street! Off our street! You, sir, please, just here to protest! Please, stand down!
Well, shortly after that took place, we had Falarca on the show. Kind of an amazing experience. Just so we can understand the standard here, what is a fascist?
So a fascist is someone who's organizing a mass movement that's attacking women, immigrants, black people, other minority groups in a movement of genocide. That's what a fascist is.
Okay. So it's someone who's committing violence?
And it's someone who's committing violence and who's trying to organize other people to commit violence.
Okay.
And Milo Yiannopoulos is a fascist.
Okay. So he's committed acts of violence against the protected groups you mentioned?
Well, what he's doing is he's trying to be the youth face and the token that other people who are organizing violence try to hide behind. And so in all of his talks all over the country, what Yiannopoulos has done is whip up a whole lynch mob mentality where people who come to see him or his supporters not only agree with his views, but also attack other people. And that was certainly true in Washington State when one of his supporters came and actually shot an anti-fascist protester. But in Berkeley, we made sure that didn't happen because we were able to shut him down.
So, but you're conceding that Milo himself has not committed acts of violence, and nor has he incited violence by the legal definition. He'd be in jail if he did. But you're saying that because people who agree with him have committed violence, he should not be allowed to speak.
You know, fascist movement takes many forms, and it always tries to have one form that looks respectable and a little bit milder. But Yiannopoulos isn't just a stand-up comedian, and he isn't someone who just has ideas and posts them up on YouTube. He's someone who is funded by Breitbart and Steve Bannon to go around to college campuses to try to recruit other young people to then conduct those attacks on his behalf and on Trump's behalf. But I'm really, really glad to say that thousands of us were out there last week, or February 1st, and made sure that there were thousands of us to make sure that we defended our campus, this community, and especially the immigrant and Muslim students who were under attack and have been under attack by him and other fascists.
Right, and by using violence, I mean, you don't shy away from that by any means necessary is the name of your group, and so it implies violence. So what should we do with fascists? I mean, if you think that someone is espousing genocide, what should we do with them? I mean, should that person be allowed to walk free? Should we put him in jail? Should we kill him? Should we exile him? I mean, it's a sincere question. If you're willing to use violence because you think someone is espousing genocide, what's the penalty for that?
Well, first we've got to make sure we nip it in the bud, and we make sure that they're not allowed to recruit and act as if it's respectable to call for the mass murder of millions of people, in fact, millions who make up the majority of people in this nation at this point.
Okay,
and so they
just
can't
to be
hide
clear,
behind
there's
a platform of free
Milo
speech.
Yiannopoulos, this is not a defense of him, just a factual point, has not ever said that, in public anyway, not that we have a record of. There's no evidence that he has called for the genocide of anybody, as you know, but you're saying by transference in some way, he inspires people who believe that, I guess. But you're not getting my question. Like, what would you say nip in the bud? Should he be allowed to go on the subway and talk to the guy next to him about perhaps joining his movement? Or should he be allowed to talk to people in restaurants? Or what should we do with the fascist who you believe is inspiring genocide?
So first of all, the alt-right is a neo-fascist movement, and they're trying to hide behind some softer versions of their more open counterparts who identify themselves as Nazis. But they're still part of the same movement, first of all. Second of all, when someone is trying to speak at a campus or at a rally, they're doing it not just because they have an opinion, but someone like Yiannopoulos or any other alt-righter or fascist or neo-fascist is doing it to recruit other people. No, we don't let them recruit. And in fact, when you look back at the Holocaust and the lessons that we draw from that, we don't say, oh, well, at least we let them voice their opinion. We say never again.
Okay,
well,
but so,
again is now, especially after Trump.
We elevate people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer or members of the plot against the leader of Nazi Germany to kill him. So, I mean, that was the response, of course, to the leader of that fascist movement. Most people think it was legitimate. Do you think, you're not answering my question, that people like Milo, who you've decided are fascists, should be allowed to speak in public? You said they weren't allowed to speak at Berkeley.
He should not be allowed to speak in public to spread his racist and misogynistic and homophobic lies. No, he does not have the right to do that. You know what? In Sacramento, there were fascists who had knives tied at the ends of sticks, and they stabbed people, including
Not the man that you hit. He looked kind of unarmed to me.
Oh, yes, actually, they did. And it's funny to you, but it's actually not funny to the rest of us. And that's why we take this really seriously.
I know that you take it seriously, and that's why I'm asking you a really simple question.
But I am serious as a heart. I am serious as a heartbeat,
I believe you. Oh, I believe that you're serious.
And we're not talking about a classroom. We're talking about people who are trying to kill and murder people and who've already done it. And who are trying to create a hostile environment on these campuses in order to do that. No, that's not a safe environment for immigrant students. That's not a safe environment for women or Muslim students or trans students. And so, yeah, we have a right to defend ourselves and real free speech.
Let me ask you one last question, if I may. So if you're standing, I just want to know, like, the protocol for anti-fascist activists like yourself. You're standing on a street corner, someone starts saying something you don't like, and you think, boy, that's an act of hostility, that person's a fascist.
No, but you're misrepresenting the words that I've been saying. This isn't about not liking something. This isn't about Ben and Jerry's versus Stone Cold Pizza or something. This is about the lives of real people, immigrants who are under attack now, Muslims who are being massacred,
and I'm
women who are being
you,
raped.
How deep is your
commitment? So you're the one trivializing this, not me.
I'm not in any way trivializing. And I ask you a sincere question. To what extent would you go to stop that person from spreading genocidal propaganda?
I would call for people to counter-protest, to stand up, and to shut down any attempts to fascistly recruit and organize.
Like, what if I want to keep talking? I'm saying something that you find appalling, but you know what? I've got a First Amendment right. I'm an American. What would you do? So a bunch of people come and say, stop that. I say, no, I'm not going to stop that. I'm an American. What are you going to do next?
You know, the First Amendment, you know, you want to talk about the First Amendment? Coretta Scott King's letter wasn't allowed to be read on the floor of the Senate last week under the Constitution in the Senate.
Well, that's exactly what happened.
And yet, at the same time, you're the one then who's actually trying to defend someone like a fascist speaking and recruiting at a college campus.
All right, Yvette,
I'm proud to say that we all stood up and we shut him down.
Speech rights. All right, thanks for coming on. Dozens of kids at Notre Dame University walked out on the vice president rather than listen to him talk. That was a terrifying prospect. Up next, we'll talk to comedian Michael Loftus about why politics has invaded even commencement speeches.